on behalf of the Space Walk of Fame, I want to welcome these honored guests here today for the Gemini 40th reunion since the end of the program. And the people that I have here today are all Martin guys who used to work for the lost vehicle. And we were all test conductors except John Gwinnup on my extreme left here, who was a propulsion engineer. And on my extreme right here is Jim Kelley, who still lives in Florida, and he later on went and had a career with NASA. To my immediate right is Chuck Cicchetti, who was the Vehicle 3 test conductor and Vehicle 1. And Chuck went on to have a career with IBM. And then my left is Marcus Goodkind, and he was with us through the entire program. Gemini program, and then John Gwinnup, who was our propulsion engineer, one of our propulsion engineers. And welcome, and I'm glad you all came. And we're trying to replicate the group that you see on the wall here behind us. 4 of the original 8 that are in that group are here, seated at this table right now. So with that, thanks for coming, and good to see you all. A lot of these guys I haven't seen in at least 10 years, many of them in 20 years or more. So I would like to start out. I'll ask you, Chuck, first of all, what was your most memorable experience on the Gemini?
Getting John Young and Gus Grissom up in the air, but I think one of the things that we were going through a test to determine whether the umbilicals that they pulled out wrong would cause any damage to the launch vehicle. And we had everything going pretty well, except every time that we got to about the 3rd umbilical, we goofed up. So we decided to make a change. We took the crew, launch crew 1, moved them to the 1st umbilical that had to come out, and after that we pulled launch crew 1 to the 2nd umbilical, to the 1st umbilical that it had to come out. So we got through that, and I think that saved us a lot of time, because what I'm saying is we were running that test, and I went away for a 4-day vacation, and I came back and we were still running the same damn test. So that was one of the memorable things. And I think one of the other things that was really fun was this gentleman on my right, Jim Kelley. He always had an idea on how to make things better. We had our own coffee pot. We had our own candy machine. The only thing we lacked was dancing girls, but other than that, it was fine. That's about it, Bob.
Okay. Well, you also launched Vehicle 1, didn't you?
Yes, I launched Vehicle 1, which we proved out the feasibility of the spacecraft, and then the guy on my right launched GLV-2 to make sure that all the systems worked. Then the 3rd one was mine with Gus Grissom and John Young in it, and I really enjoyed it. It was a fun program. The people on it were like family.
Chuck, you had been in Denver before that, hadn't you? And you came down to Florida. Did your coming down here, was that commensurate with the start of the Gemini program, or were you here before the Gemini started?
I was here before the Gemini. I came down on Titan 1.
Okay.
And Titan 2. I had a lot of experience on Titan 2 because I went to Sacramento, California to go through it with Aerojet General on the fuels for Titan 1 and 2. And Gentili, I haven't seen him here. He was one of the gentlemen that was with me out there too.
Yeah, in a blue suit. Did you find, Chuck, a great deal of difference in launching a vehicle? You had launch experience on the Titan 2. Did you find a great deal of difference in launching a vehicle with 2 men on it from launching a Titan 2 rocket system? Was there a great deal of difference there in your mind?
Yes, and how?
And what were those differences?
Well, you're dealing with a human life when you got people on it. The only difference I didn't notice, Bob, was when I was in Denver, we did static firing.
Yeah.
They were even worse than launching them with a man on it, because the static firing, when you were through, if you goofed up, it was still there. But if you launched it with a human or launched a vehicle at the Cape and it left, all your mistakes went in the air with it.
Hey, would you tell that story about blowing that one up on the hillside there in Denver? You came out of the blockhouse feeling kind of low, and you met Bucky Merrill.
Say again, Bob?
You all had blown up one on the test stand in Denver. And what did he say?
I said, situation normal. Then we got down and the whole bottom of the tank was gone.
Yeah. And you came out and you met the vice president of Denver as you were going down the hill, and he says, "How are you?" And you said, "Not too well."
Yeah.
He says, "Oh, don't worry about it. We make them right down the hill."
That's right. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. Hey, Jim, speak to us about the second vehicle. Tell me your remembrances on that one.
Of course, my name is James Kelley, and to give you a little background, I came down here to this area at the Cape Canaveral test area, or launch facility, from Michigan. Do you want to run a test again? One, two, three, four. Okay.
It's okay.
Bob just keeps banging the bottle on the counter and he sits it down.
Okay. My name is James Kelley. I came down from Michigan in 1961, answered an ad in the Wall Street Journal. And they said they had a training program, and I answered that, and lo and behold, it was a training program for Titan 1 and Titan 2 test conductors. So I went through the Titan 2 training program, which involved working on the pad with the technicians and the engineers, and also working with the test conductors, so forth. And so anyway, after that, when Chuck was told that he was going to be the test conductor on Gemini 1, I was assigned to be the pad control on, no, I was assigned, let me correct that, I was assigned to load propellants on second shift. And Bob Adcock was assigned to be pad control on the first shift. And so anyway, prior to the launch of Gemini 1, we went through a loading test, propellant loading test, which was very interesting because we had two engineering groups. We had one which was launch engineers, and we had another one called staff engineers. And the staff engineers had their headquarters or their offices in the hangar, and the launch engineers had their offices on the pad, and they were the supervisors of the technicians. So during the propellant loading test, I came into work about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I got a call from the staff engineer and said, "These are the temperatures we want to see on the tank inlet probes." And they were roughly 38 degrees for the nitrogen tetroxide and about 42 degrees or 44 degrees for the hydrazine. And so I told Hugh Jackson, and he was critical to make sure. I always wanted Hugh Jackson to be on the same shift anytime I was involved with a prior to or preparing for the launch. And Hugh was in charge of cooling down the propellants in the propellant farms. So I called Hugh when I was on the net, and I told him what the engineers had said, and so he set the temperatures at that temperature. And so about, I would say 11 o'clock at night, we started flowing propellants. And the temperatures again were about 38 degrees for the nitrogen tetroxide and about 42 or 44 degrees for the hydrazine. And the next day, anyway, we loaded successfully. And then, anyway, we unloaded. The next day, we had a meeting with the engineers and also the test conductors. And the engineers were a little bit sarcastic when they said, well, we gave you the numbers, but the inlet probes showed that the propellants were 2 degrees higher than what we wanted. So Frank Carey, the person we worked for, was sitting next to me. He was a complex manager. And he sat next to me and he said, is that a problem? And I said, no. And he said, all right. And he didn't say any more. So I got in touch with Hugh Jackson the next day and I said, when we load propellants for launch, I want to make sure that you're on my shift. And he said, all right, I will be. And I said, I'll give you 2 numbers for the temperature of propellants. And he said, all right. And so anyway, Chuck was a test conductor, as I say, on Gemini 1. Bob Adcock was working pad control, starting at roughly 3 o'clock in the morning. And I was loading propellants, and I came in the night before at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And we started flowing propellants at about, I'll say, 10 o'clock that night. But before we started flowing propellants, we had to cool them down. And I asked Hugh Jackson if he had a pickup truck or a vehicle at the propellant farms, and he said yes. I said, would you take a ride up to the blockhouse? I'll meet you at the door. We came up, and I said, I want you, here are the numbers, and I want you to lower them by 2 degrees. He said, all right. So he went back to the propellant farms, and he set them 2 degrees lower. And anyway, the engineers were there watching our performance in the blockhouse. And lo and behold, we loaded both the propellants and the inlet probes to the tanks showed that we were right on target.
Okay.
Amazing.
Yeah.
All right. Second thing that I wanted to pass along to you was the fact that for the launch of Gemini 1, of course, I mentioned that Chuck was the test conductor, Bob was the pad control on first shift, and I was the person assigned to loading propellants on the shift prior to that time. And about a week before that, Bob said, you know, I'm a little anxious about being a pad control because I don't know these people and I've never been pad control before. And I said, that's all right. I said, I'll help you. So I came in at 3 o'clock that afternoon, and the day shift went home. And Hugh Jackson there was again there, and I gave him the numbers at about 6 o'clock. And again, we hit the targets after I lowered the numbers by 2 degrees. And so anyway, everybody was happy with the propellant temperatures. So at 3 o'clock in the morning, Chuck came in, and he said, all right, first shift is here, and I said, fine. And I left about 3:30. I had a station wagon at the time, and I said something like, I'm going to take my station wagon over to the hangars or some remote area and see if I can get some sleep in the back, fold-out area. And I was able to probably get about an hour, maybe an hour and a half's worth of sleep. I got up and went and had breakfast at Pan Am and reported to Bob on the pad at 7 o'clock. And when I got to the pad, anyway, Bob said to me with kind of a worried look, he said, Wally Fagan and his 4 or 5 technicians just took the elevator up to the white room. And we don't have any technicians to take care of the platforms and the curtains for the launch vehicle. He said, we don't have any mechanical techs. And I said, well, I knew all these technicians. And I said, I think I can help you on that. So I went downstairs And in the propulsion room, I found 2 propulsion technicians. And I said, for the powers invested in me, you are now a mechanical tech. And I want you to get a hammer and I want you to get a crescent wrench. And tether them to you and then report to me on the pad in roughly 5 to 10 minutes. I went into the instrumentation room underneath the pad, found 1 technician there, and I said, same thing. I said, get a hammer and a crescent wrench, and he was up on the pad in about 5 minutes. And I found 2 electricians. And I said, do the same thing. And I said, if you want me to wave my hand, okay, and bless you as being now a mechanical technician, I will. So anyway, when I got back to the top of the pad, there was 5 men with hammers and crescent wrench. And I said, now we climb to the 6th level. And there was some groaning and so forth among the technicians, but I said, all right, come into a huddle with me. I said, I want to tell you something. When this is all over, it's going to be a great launch. And I said, when it's over, I said, I will add 2 hours of overtime to each one of your time cards. So that's your motivation to do a good job for me. Well, with that, everything was great. I want to stop now and get a drink. May I?
Certainly.
What?
Hey, Jim, you really saved the day that day because we were kind of in trouble. I was kind of in trouble out there being the pad control. Now, Chuck was on the other end in the blockhouse, and as far as he knew, everything was going okay. Right?
Everything was fine. Everything was
We didn't even hold, did we?
No.
All I had to contend with was fuzzball.
Well, anyway, I followed the technicians up to the 6th level, and we started raising and lowering the platforms and securing them, and also securing the curtains. And we worked our way all the way down. And roughly at about T-minus 43 minutes or 42 minutes, we were done.
Yeah.
So I said to the guys, you can go back now and take your wrenches and your crescent wrenches and your hammers and so forth, and then take a truck and go back to the blockhouse or wait for one of Wally Fagan's engineers, technicians. So anyway, about that same time, Wally came down from the light room, and it was now about T-minus 38 minutes, and he walked over to me and he said, we still have to do the launch vehicle side of platforms. And I said, Wally, it's all done. And he said, great. And he said, then we're ready to lower the erector. And I said, you're right. So I told one of the people to go and plug in his box and so forth, and they did. And I walked up to Bob and I said, Bob, we're ready for step 1 of T-minus 35 minutes.
Right.
And he said, I want you to call it in. He said, I don't want to know if I could handle that or not. And I said, fine. So I called Chuck here, and I said, TC, this is pad control, and we're ready for step 1 at T-minus 35 minutes. And he said, go, mother. And they lowered the erector, and we had a very successful launch.
Yeah.
Bob, if I can only interject, as I said before, we acted like family.
Yeah.
That was the first time that a launch was conducted without a hole in the free world. That was the first no-hole launch countdown in the history of the spacecraft. Thanks to Jim Kelley and to Bob Adcock.
Well, I didn't have much to do with it, but I knew when to holler for help. So. Now, Marcus, I'm remembering.
Do you want me to finish up with?
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Please go ahead.
All right. The next incident I thought I would mention, or the next activity, was on the Gemini 2 launch, in which I was the test conductor. I was sitting in the blockhouse, and the man that was controlling the sequencer, his last name was Brewer. I don't remember his first name, but he was an excellent technician. And we were counting down to T-minus 30 minutes, and I was side-toning the spacecraft test conductor, who happened to be George Page. And they were calling from him from someplace on the Cape and telling him that they wanted to see they had fired the reaction control system at one point. And somebody said, we want to see the reaction control system fire again. Now, when they fired the reaction control system, it made the vehicle sway a little bit, not much. But the reaction control system controls the spacecraft while it's in orbit. So anyway, George had to get his people in that system lined up, and he was in the process then of they were firing the reaction control system to satisfy all the spacecraft engineers and so forth and managers. And now we're at T-minus 15 minutes. So I called all the people reporting to me, the lead engineers from Martin, the Air Force, Frank Kelley, who was the complex manager, the SRO, who was the superintendent of range operations. And I said, I'm looking for a go for launch. And I got a go from everybody except from the spacecraft operations. And that was happened to be George Page sitting right next to me. Like, Chuck is here and I'm here. And I can hear exactly, Frank was back behind us, and anyway, I could hear exactly what they were saying, and they said, okay, at T-minus 10 minutes, he said to the RCS, the reaction control system engineers and techs, all right, reconfigure for launch. Well, I knew from another test they ran that it takes them about 15 minutes to reconfigure from firing to be ready for a launch configuration. And so I laid my hand on Brewer's shoulder and I said, Mr. Brewer, I'm not going to talk to you for the rest of this today unless we recycle. But if I don't if I don't say another word to you, I want you to hold the count at T-minus 5 minutes. So then I turned around to George Page and I said to George off the net, I said, I need a go from spacecraft operations. And he said, we don't have time to get reconfigured with our RCS system to give you a go at this time. And I said, okay. I didn't talk to Brewer at all. And at T-minus 5 minutes, of course, our consoles went red and so forth. We were holding. I remember Frank Kelley was sitting behind me between George and myself, and he broke his pencil and he threw it on it. And he said, damn, you know, or something like that. And anyway, I just called all the lead engineers and I said, I want you to go to the recycle procedure, and when you're ready for a go, please inform the test conductor. So all the lead engineers responded to that, and the superintendent of range operations responded to that, and the Air Force and so forth. And it took us approximately 16 minutes for me to get a go. In the meantime, I got a go from all our people within 10 minutes or so. And when I got a go from spacecraft test conductor George Page, we launched, and that was about 11:16 in the morning. Later on, when I went from the Gemini program to the Apollo program as a test conductor, and then later on to the Shuttle program at NASA, and I had 2 or 3 people ask me, why was Gemini 2 launched at 11:16? I said, we were waiting on spacecraft to give me a go. And he said, we never knew that. And that was never published in any documents at all. Anyway, I also gave Mr. Brewer 3 hours of authorized overtime. I said, if you have any questions with that, if the man that you work for has any questions, I'll initial it and make sure your time card is satisfactory.
Well,
And I guess to wrap it all up, I'd say, like Chuck said, you know, I guess I owe the launch success of the Gemini program to all the people that worked there. They were very dedicated people. They were very bright people, and they would, you know, really get out and give you 150% if necessary to accomplish what you know had to be done. And that, I guess, concludes my my presentation. Thank you.
thank you. Marcus, I'm remembering you for a lot of things, of course.
Very good.
No, very favorably. But one of the things that was unique that I thought that was done on the Gemini was the training that we went through with the simulated malfunctions and everything. Would you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I'll get to that. I'll get to that. I want to give a little background first.
Okay.
Being a recording engineer, I got to make sure that's facing
Yeah,
right.
okay. Thank you.
I came to the Cape in 1959 on the Mace missile program. Came from Baltimore, Martin, Baltimore, and worked for Joe Verlander, whose picture is back here.
Yeah.
He's right there.
Yeah.
And that program lasted about 18 months, 2 years, something like that. And then the training program that Jim referred to was called the Missile Management Training Program. There were 4 people selected for that. Jim was one of them. Chuck, were you in that program? No, you weren't in that program. Anyway, there were 4 of us picked. I was the only one picked from inside the company, from Martin. And just as an aside, the other 3 guys eventually left Martin Marietta. I was the only one that stayed with them, for better or for worse. On the first few Gemini launches, I was assigned as something called mission monitor. And what the mission monitor's job was to sit in mission control, which at that time was at the Cape, and answer questions about the booster to Chris Kraft, who was the flight director, NASA flight director, and eventually give a go for the booster. And so one of the most memorable things I remember about that is sitting in mission control at the Cape. And Chris was going down through, getting a go from everybody. And of course, he came to me, and I had already checked with the guys at the complex, and they said everything was okay. So I gave him a go. And then he got to the NASA computer engineer. Okay, the NASA computer engineer was about the only woman in mission control at that time. And he said, computer, are you go? And she says, and I'll never forget this, she said, cycling and ready. Anyway, that was my experience as mission monitor. Okay. After that, I worked on several vehicles as pad control, and there was one interesting incident as pad control. After a static firing, I went up to inspect the engine bell. Well, I didn't know, or I had forgotten, that there was still a nitrogen purge in the bell. So I stick my head up inside the bell to look around. I got one whiff of the nitrogen and fell right straight down.
Is that right?
Yeah, I did that.
I didn't know that.
I did that. Almost passed out.
My goodness.
Yep. So then, after that, working pad control for several vehicles, I became test conductor on Gemini 6. Well, Gemini 6 had a very interesting history. Because the first time we tried to launch it, one of the tail plugs umbilicals fell out prematurely when the engine started. And that sent a liftoff signal, prematurely sent it to the spacecraft, and also sent it to the ground control equipment. Well, the ground control equipment says, well, something's wrong because the vehicle's lifted out, but all these other plugs are still connected. So the ground equipment sent a shutdown to the vehicle, and there we were. 2 guys sitting on top, and the vehicle shut down, and of course they're sitting on all this propellant, and nobody knew what had happened. So we went into an emergency procedure, and we sent pad control out to the pad. Pad control was Ken Scheidt. All we knew is that the vehicle shut down, and then Ken calls back from the pad and he says, we have a fire in the boat tail. Okay. So at this point, Frank was talking to the guys in the capsule, and he was telling them what was going on. And when he told them that they had a fire in the boat tail, I'm sure that they had both hands on their D-rings.
Yeah.
Because in the capsule they had D-rings which, if they pulled, would fire ejection seats, which had never been done before, never been tested, and we really didn't know whether they were going to work. And hopefully, we said, well, hope it doesn't get to that. Well, we did get the fire out, and so then we had to decide, well, what are we going to do with Gemini 6, since the object of one of the objects of the program was to rendezvous with an Agena. Well, the Agena was gone, and so we came up with this idea to de-erect Gemini 6 and put Gemini 7 up, launch Gemini 7, and then immediately put Gemini 6 back up and launch it. Well, it was a great idea, but it required a whole lot of change in documentation. The biggest change was to write a countdown called the rendezvous countdown, and that was a huge undertaking to write this simultaneous countdown so that we could count down both 7 and 6 at the same time. The responsibility of writing that countdown fell to me, and we worked night and day on that, and it wasn't just me, of course, but I was primarily responsible for it. So we did launch Gemini 7, and then we erected Gemini 6 and launched it. I'm leaving out a whole lot of detail. I can't go into the kind of detail Jim did. I don't have that kind of memory. But it was very successful. And interestingly enough, and I was just talking about this to some of the guys, it was the first time in the history of manned space that 4 astronauts were in orbit at the same time.
Yes.
Gemini 7 and 6 flew side by side, and some of the pictures of a Gemini spacecraft in flight, the only pictures that were ever taken of a Gemini spacecraft in flight from another spacecraft.
Gemini 6 abort.
Gemini 6 abort. Really? All right.
This is the 2 astronaut biomeds
Oh, wow. Look at that.
from Bob Seek.
Little rapid heart rate there.
They looked at the doctors and said they really were scared. The doctors said they were pissed.
They were pissed, yeah. Yeah, that was probably a little butt puckering there, too. So anyway, it was a very successful mission. It was called the Gemini 76 mission, and so afterwards, a bunch of us were interviewed about this mission by local media, and one guy who interviewed me from the Florida Today paper, when he wrote the story, he quoted me as saying that this was my greatest achievement.
I wasn't going to bring it up.
Well, yeah. It's not exactly what I said, but that's how he quoted me. So I took a lot of ribbing about that, like, I pulled this off single-handed, right? I didn't have any help at all. I just did this all by myself. So that was one of my really interesting memories. The other thing that happened on the Gemini program is that my twin boys were born. Now this was right in the beginning of the program, and they ran that in the paper too. You know, Gemini test conductor has twin boys, and is he going to name them Castor and Pollux? Well, they weren't named Castor and Pollux; they were named Scott and Marty. But that was a real funny thing. Just to go back for a minute, I remembered something else. Right in the beginning of the program, before we ever had a launch, one of the things that we did is that we very closely monitored what was going on in the Mercury program to learn whatever we could about, launching a man into space. And I was fortunate enough to be in the blockhouse when John Glenn was launched. And of course, I remember very distinctly hearing on the headset as he took off, "Godspeed, John Glenn."
Yeah.
And that was a wonderful thing for me to be able to experience. What I want to say about the Gemini program is that it was the most fun program for me. As Chuck and Jim have pointed out, we were a family. We worked hard, we played hard, and we were always very cognizant of what we were doing as far as our place in the nation's space program. But it was, and I went on from Gemini. I was on Apollo, and then after that Skylab, and after that Shuttle. But Gemini was the program that stands out in my mind as being the most fun, because after Gemini, it was work, and no play. And I kept waiting for one of those programs to be as rewarding as Gemini was, and it never was. Even Apollo 11. I was a spacecraft manager on the lunar module for Apollo 11. And I didn't consider that my greatest achievement. I still consider Gemini as being the program that I would have most liked all the other programs to be like. And the other programs were never that way.
Mark, I can't let you get off without talking about baby Seco. What vehicle was that on, and would you say a few words about it?
Well, Bob, I have to tell you, I don't remember what vehicle that was on. And what I remember about baby Seco is that actually, I don't remember very much about it. Well, what do you remember about baby Seco?
Well,
refresh my memory.
We had a spurious second stage sustainer engine cutoff signal that came in on one of our tests, and we didn't know where it came from. It disappeared. So we went on down, and we were about ready to mate the spacecraft, or we were about ready to call it a launch, and the NASA told us that you're either going to find this thing or we're going to call the launch off. So anyway, we cranked up a special test to look for baby Seco. In the meantime, Mark had, this was about the same time that the movie came out, Whatever Happened to Baby Jane.
Right.
And he said, whatever happened to baby Seco? So we went out and we ran a special test, went into the night, I remember that, and we kept recycling and everything, finally made it happen again, but I don't remember much more than that. But the management picked up on that, and it got to even Colonel Albert and all of his gang knew what baby Seco was all about.
Right. I remember something else really funny that happened.
Okay.
And Pan Am had a chow wagon that would come to the complex 19, would come every lunchtime, right? And almost everybody in the complex that didn't bring their lunch ate off this chow wagon.
Right.
And we had a familiar name for it, and it was called the Roach Coach. And one time when this woman drove up in the chow wagon, somebody, it was probably Jerry Walden, made an announcement over the PA and said, "The Roach Coach has made its approach." The woman turned around and left, and nobody ate off the chow wagon that day.
I want to add something to Mark's comment about the Roach Coach, all right?
Yeah.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
All right. It came to the blockhouse first, and then it came, went up to the pad and so forth, and it serviced, served our food, well, I guess on all 3 shifts. And there was a young lieutenant in the Air Force that was getting in line to get his food one day, and I don't remember his name and never did learn his name. But I was standing in line to get something to drink anyway, and he was about 3 people away from being served by the lady, and he said to his friend, he said, I wonder why the ladies that work on these roach coaches aren't better looking. So she heard it. She didn't say anything at that time. She got up and he said, and she said, "Wait a minute, Buster Brown. I'm not here to screw you. I'm here to serve you food. You can go away."
Well, who was the woman's name that drove that?
Jim would remember. He remembers everything.
It was Hortense, wasn't it?
There was one by the name of Hortense, and there was one by the name of Hildegard.
Yeah.
And there was 2 of them anyway.
Yeah, okay.
Bob, if I can remember one, I mean, we joke about it. We have a lot of fun on Gemini, and I thought it was the best program I ever worked on.
Yeah.
But what I really probably should have said and remembered is before they let me launch GLV-3, they sent me to Houston to go through the spacecraft simulator.
Oh.
And they put me in the damn spacesuit. I think you were with me, Mark, that time. They put me in a spacesuit, and every time you moved, you hear, man, that was enough. But then when they strapped me in, and all of a sudden, they rotated me back, and I'm looking straight up. And then they started a record. It was the record of a regular Gemini firing, and they put you through half a G, start shaking the living daylights out of you. And then the thing that you were supposed to do is remember, Mark probably remembers it being on mission control, 2 Qs caused an abort. So all of a sudden I'm looking there, and here's the oxidizer and the fuel.
Okay.
Oxidizer goes out, fuel's coming down. I reached under the seat and pulled the damn handle. And that was an abort. And Gus Grissom says, "Okay, Chuck, what the hell was that for?" I said, "Well, the oxidizer and the, oh, hell." He says, "What's the matter?" I said, "The fuel didn't go out." He said, "Well, why did you pull the abort?" I says, "I guess I got scared." He says, "That's the best answer I've had on that one all day long." And then the one other thing I want to say is that everybody on the Gemini program, if you had made the team, you had a nickname. And to my right was Cool Hand Luke. To my left was, "Are you sure?" And the guy on the far right with the beard there says, "Would you believe?" And they had an endearing name for me, Mass in Motion. So with that, I've got to say that I had more fun on Gemini than I did on Apollo. And even in developing the first personal computer, helped develop the first personal computer for IBM. Bob, thanks for inviting us here, and I sure enjoyed it.
Well, I love you guys, you know that. And one of the things that I brought out yesterday with the Air Force was that inadvertently, one of the things the Gemini program accomplished was training of people sufficient to just about man all the contractors and the government positions over and across the river, you know, with people with the manned spacecraft experience. Jim, did you have something you wanted to contribute?
Yes, 2 things. You're looking at the 4 test conductors who were on the Gemini program. At no time were there ever any bad words between the four of us. We helped one another. One person wrote the countdown for the other test conductor. The man who worked second shift wrote the countdown for the man who was actually going to be conducting the countdown. And the man who was actually conducting the countdown, he was the one that developed the schedule. And it worked out very well. And then we had a man in Houston and so forth, and we just rotated.
Yeah.
But there were no negatrons at all. It was all a very positive team and so forth.
Hey, John, I wanted to ask you a little bit about your job. You were a propulsion engineer, and did you work mainly on the loading system, or did you work the engines, or what part of the propulsion group did you?
Well, mainly everything: propulsion, propellants, pressurization, and doing performing the tests on the engines prior to during the checkouts and things. One of the things, of course, I have a lot of memories like everybody else on the Gemini program, and you guys were all great to work for. It was one of the best times of my life. But I remember one of the things that happened. I guess it was prior to the first launch when with Grissom and his. I can't remember who went
Grissom
up with
and
it. Young, right. He gave us a little talk in the control room.
Okay.
And one of the things he says, I'd like, when I'm out there on the pad walking around, he says, I would not like to see any of you guys walking around with your fingers crossed. I never will forget that. And then, I don't know what launch it was, but Tom Stafford was the astronaut.
6.
Was that 6?
6.
He came down to the trailer that we worked out of, and he shook hands with all the guys in the propulsion crew, and thanked us, for a job well done and everything. And he was the only one really that ever did that. But I don't think I washed my hand, for a couple of weeks after I shook hands with him. But
What was one of the toughest times that you remember trying to get everything together?
one of the incidents I remember was the time that I think it was Captain Gentili shut the launch pad down.
Yeah, tell us about that.
I don't really remember all the details. I know we were in the process of getting ready to install these pogo tanks on the fuel lines,
Right.
because we had this vibration problem, and I guess we were trying to get a little ahead of ourselves, and we didn't have all the engineering, or I believe, or something. I'm not sure what it was.
I could tell you.
But
We'll get to you.
anyway, we got to go home early that night because Gentili wouldn't let us do the job.
Was that a Saturday night?
Yes.
It could have been.
We had pogos, you remember?
The Saturday Night Massacre, right?
Pogo was defined as a vibration from the steer horns that controlled the oxidizer flowing into the injector head. And IBM had come up with a transducer that was a fit between the fins on the top of a chamber.
IBM did?
Not IBM, excuse me. Martin Company did. And so it didn't fit, so I called the Golden Greek, who was Lou Polis, who was a propulsion engineer. And I said, how the heck are we going to do this, Lou? He says, well, just grind them a little bit and make it fit. So I wanted to grind them, and Gentili says, stop, you can't do that. I said, the hell I can't. We get $2 million for launching on time, and I says, and I ain't going to jeopardize that. And he says, you can't do that. So he went and got, not Colonel Alpert, the other guy.
Oswald.
Oswald come there and says, my staff says you can't do that. And I says, well, I'm your engineering force, and I say we're going to do it. He says, well, I want you to stop. And I says, well, I won't stop. He says, well, who's in charge? I says, I am. So I'm putting it in. He says, okay. He says, well, who's in charge of this complex? I says, Joe Verlander. He says, well, call Verlander. I says, he ain't here. He's on leave. Well, who's in charge when Verlander's gone? Frank Carey. We'll call Frank Carey. And I says, he ain't here either. He says, when he's gone, who's in charge? I said, I am. He says, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to grind. So he says, what other choice do I have? I said, your other choice is to send us all home. And that's what happened.
That was about 8 o'clock at night.
Yeah. Oh, man.
And that was the first, wasn't it, as far as you know?
Yeah.
First and only. The end of that story was that Verlander finally got the message, sometime on Sunday. So he talked to, at that time, it was, Jack Albert had been promoted to full colonel. And he called him, I guess, about 7 o'clock that night, on Sunday night, and he said, are the Martin people going to be able to start work tomorrow at 6:48 in the morning? And he said, yes, why? Captain Gentili had forgot to tell Colonel Albert that he had ordered the Pan Am.
That's rich.
Yeah.
Pan Am to clear the complex. And he said, why do you ask? And he said, well, Captain Gentili closed down the complex. He said, the gates will be open for you people whenever they arrive on Monday morning. He scheduled a meeting with all the Air Force people at 6 a.m. in the support building. All the Air Force people, that was Jack Albert. And anyway, when we got there at 6:48, life went on and so forth, and I don't know whatever happened to the mod. They worked it or something, and that was it.
Hey, we need to stop.